What's up, guys? I'm Nicole Rios, and I've got opinions. Today, I am going to talk about how President Trump is using our economy as leverage. I've had a lot of conversations with people who don't love President Trump or the way that he operates, and I've found that the biggest complaint, especially after coming out of the week in Davos, is that the way that he is negotiating is creating a threat to longstanding allies and their economies. And I can understand that, and I can see that. I think that my position is that presidents for all of time have used our economy as leverage in foreign affairs and foreign negotiations. And to me, this feels kind of Trump derangement syndrome, that there's this influence because it's Trump doing it, that it automatically has to be bad or wrong. So today I am just going to outline a couple of things that I understand to be true about Trump's negotiation style. I am also going to talk about some of the historic ways that we've used our economy as leverage. And I'm also going to outline some of the economic numbers that will inform us all on why we have the ability to operate within this power and why economic leverage is so much superior as a negotiating tactic to military intervention. And I think that we could all probably agree we'd rather negotiate with our consumerism than negotiate with weapons. So that's kind of where I'm at. So one of the things that I just want to outline that I'm hearing a lot is this argument about our relationship with NATO and how important our allies have been historically. And I agree with that 100%. I appreciate what NATO meant after World War II. I appreciate how it created an allied structure to support world peace. At that time, it was put together by a group of European nations who were threatened by other European nations. And we came in as a party almost completely separate to support world and global peace, which I think is a valiant thing to do. Now, that was 80 years ago, and the global powers have shifted. And up until Trump won, NATO wasn't really fulfilling its portion of the deal. And it's okay to say, hey, this longstanding institution isn't quite functioning the way it was originally intended to, or people aren't chipping in to cover their portion of the deal. Now, that was Trump won, and they did, and we had great positive impact. Everybody agreed to start amping up closer to 3 or 5% of GDP towards defense spending. Now, that wouldn't have ever happened if it weren't for Trump's bull in a china shop technique. When we look at how diplomacy and politics has worked in the past, there's carrots and sticks, right? We are either going to lure someone with a carrot or we're going to make them do it with a stick. And some of what I was hearing today was a lot of Trump only uses sticks. I would argue that these trade negotiations started at the beginning of 2025. He has been working on getting major trading partners out of high tariffs since Liberation Day. And I'm not really sure that regular diplomatic relations would be getting us the outcomes that we're seeing. I mean, American presidents have used things like sanctions to leverage our economy. They have used tariffs historically to leverage our economy. And we've also created trade barriers for certain countries in order to create more equal playing field. And that's not just a Trump thing. The other thing that I think is important is that we also do the carrots. We use our economy by giving foreign aid. We use our economy by being able to put a percentage of our GDP towards foreign investments and making sure that we're involved in trying to help other people that aren't doing as well, i.e. right now, Venezuela. I think that some of the problem is that historically this has just looked very different. We've been very involved via USAID in Africa and in African countries and underdeveloped countries. And our sites have long been situated much further away in the globe than our backyard. And I went through the national security strategy this week in depth, and it's very clear what our intention is. It's very clear that our intention is to respect and continue to have these allied relationships with our European partners. But it's also very clear that the Western Hemisphere is our focus right now and our priority. And growing trading partners in the Western Hemisphere, and nearshoring was a term that came up in that document. Nearshoring certain industries so that we have more control over our trade, shipping becomes less, global emissions become less because we're not shipping so far across the oceans. I think there are a lot of positive benefits that can come out of these things, but it just looks different. And I think that is the shock that people are struggling with, that it's not what it's always been. And again, I'm a behavioral coach. I know people struggle with change, and I know that sometimes change can be hard, but when there's qualifying evidence for the change, sometimes you have to do it. Sometimes you have to pull the trigger. So just to qualify what I'm saying, I think some important historical facts to look back upon as to how we have used economic leverage in the past. Thomas Jefferson in 1807 signed the Embargo Act of 1807, which closed U.S. ports to export shipping and restricted British imports to influence European powers during the Napoleonic Wars. In Franklin D. Roosevelt used the Trading with the Enemy Act to freeze Danish and Norwegian assets following Nazi invasions, and later froze Japanese assets to block their ability to purchase oil and strategic materials. Eisenhower successfully ended the Suez Crisis by threatening to collapse the British pound and blocking U.S. financial assistance through IMF, forcing Britain, France, and Israel to withdraw forces from Egypt. Barack Obama also leveraged multilateral sanctions as a bargaining chip to secure the Iran nuclear deal, which didn't really work out in our benefit. But we also have had trade barriers and tariffs put on that have tried to even the playing field. Reagan in the 80s put certain trade barriers on textiles, auto parts, semiconductors, and steel to help us maintain competitiveness against Japan at the time. But if you lay that over to what's currently happening now, you could replace Japan with China and we're having the same conversation. I think that, again, what's important to remember is that we are 25% of the global economy. Okay, our GDP makes up 25%. One country, us, one country, 25%. And so when we look across who we are as a consumer and how much money we have to spend on things, that's a big portion. Our GDP growth for 2026 is projected between 1.9 and 2.5%. Okay, our inflation is expected to be around 2.3. 2 is a target that we would like to hit. Our unemployment looks great, 4.3 to 4.5. And we're expecting about 2 rate cuts in 2026, hopefully ending around 3% as our interest rate. So unfortunately, our European allies, their economies are not doing well. They committed a lot towards green initiatives that have absolutely bankrupted them and made them energy dependent on pretty much every other country. They stopped all of their coal plants. They started going into windmills and solar, which isn't producing enough and has indebted them to China in a way they can't afford. They're buying Russian oil, and they are relying on these Chinese trade agreements where China is trying to offload all of this cheap subsidized goods that is basically bolstering their economy. But Xi has mouths to feed, man. He's not out for anybody else but himself. And that's the thing that we have to realize is neither are we. Neither should any sovereign country. Every sovereign country has the right to make the decisions that are in their own best interest. And when you're looking at foreign policy and foreign affairs, you have to come to the table with that as the premise. Of course, we're all only working for our own benefit. Obviously, if we have allied relationships, we hope that it benefits everybody. But at some level, you have to understand that we're all negotiating for our own good. And just because America has historically had this idea that we will go save the world and help the world, like that's like the one flip side of the imperial mindset that it seems like Democrats and liberals want to latch onto, but they don't want any of the other aspects like gaining land or, buying things from people who are sovereign. And it seems a little silly to me because it's the other side of the coin. So Europe has not been able to help themselves. And Trump is just the person that's calling it out. And he's saying, hey, you guys, you bought all these windmills from China, but China doesn't have one. Don't you think that's a little silly? Don't you think it's silly that you completely tanked your energy sector for the sake of green? And don't you think that China would be behind that because they need to offload all of these electric goods because China has no oil. They only have coal. The only energy source that they can work off is electricity. And now you just bankrupted yourself to be relying on them. The thing about using economic leverage as a stick in this kind of situation is that you either deal with one partner or you deal with the other. And if you think that a little bit of tariffs coming on your imports to us is going to be a worse deal than getting in bed with China and depleting your energy sector and buying overproduced cheap goods is going to help you, it's a rough one. Not to mention all of the new speech regulations that they have that are tanking their technology sector and tanking their possibility at AI and having a competitive AI, which really, guys, is our huge portion of our GDP right now, and our projected GDP has to do with technology and AI. And you know what that needs? It needs energy and it needs freedom of speech. And so those are two things that those allies are not prioritizing for themselves. So guess what? We have a big disparity in our priorities. They also are not doing great. The European Union, their forecast for 2026 is projected at 1.5 for the EU and 1.2 to 1.4 for the rest of the Eurozone. Their inflation is a little bit lower than ours, around 1.8. But their unemployment is higher at 5.7, but I guess that is historically low for them, which is interesting. The United Kingdom, their GDP growth is only anticipated to be between 0.9 and 1%. I mean, you guys, we're doubling their GDP growth. And that comes with power. That consumer base, that money, that success, that opportunity, that provides us power and leverage. Because guess what? Countries want to make money. People want to make money. They're going to come to us and invest in us and want to ship to us and want to sell to us. That is a good thing for us. And we don't have to feel guilty about it. We're a productive country. We choose to work 80-hour work weeks. We choose to work overtime. We don't take a 2-hour siesta every afternoon. That is what has made Americans more rich and opportunistic than any other nation. That's a benefit to us. We don't have to feel bad for that. We worked for that. And I'm happy to have immigrants that want to come here and add to that. But my point is that these economies are struggling. They're not doing anything to help themselves. They're buying Russian oil while we're trying to fight a war in Ukraine. They don't have any prospects because they've hamstrung themselves in their energy sector and their tech sectors. And the only European economy that has anything close to their projected increase in growth of GDP is Spain. Okay? So it's not looking good. And the reality of the situation is we tried to negotiate all of 2025 for trade deals. We tried to get benefits. We tried to sign trade, and it didn't happen. So that was the carrot. And now it's the stick. And if NATO doesn't want to stand up and go, create this, follow through on this framework for what we're trying to get done in Greenland, I'm not saying let's buy the place. I'm also not saying let's colonize it. I'm not saying any of those things. But what I'm saying is that if you guys aren't going to, show up and man up as NATO and protect this land, guess who the underwriter essentially of NATO is? It's us. So it would be us doing it anyways, not to mention it's a landmass that's most close to us than almost any other partner in NATO. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that this framework turns into something for Greenland, that we will have access to sovereign spaces or territories, actually, which is different than sovereign, which I think is interesting because we're going to be able to run our own laws in those areas. Greenland, some people don't know, but they have super restrictive regulatory policies on building and mining and construction, and all of that would need to go through significant red tape. And to be honest with you, I really do believe those were some of the reasons why Trump was pushing. And while many people don't like his tactics and it's very disruptive to the world and chaotic, and I do understand that, it's not necessarily the negotiating style that has been used in politics in the past, and I can appreciate that. But what I can tell you is that I've read this book, okay? And in this book, you realize that Trump's negotiation tactics are shoot for the moon, to set the parameter, the top parameter, so high that when someone settles for something that they would have never settled for before, they feel like they've won. And the reality is that Trump wins, okay? So again, I don't think this man ever had any intention of military action on Greenland or trying to seize it by force, okay? He talks a big talk. We all know that. We have to come to terms with who he is and stop reacting to what he's saying. Because the reality of the situation is he shoots high. And then he ends up walking away with a win because settling on anything is more than we would have had before. What we would have had before is Greenland saying, sure, you can come in and put a base wherever you want, but then you're going to go through all of our regulations and all of our red tape, and we're going to tell you where it's at, and da, 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 da. And the reality of the situation is we need to be able to decide how to defend that area. NATO needs to be able to come together, and we need to decide as a whole how we're going to defend that area. But if we're not even having that conversation until Trump has to come out and say, hey, we need it. We're going to go get it. And that's the only way that people come to the table and take the conversation seriously. What do you expect? If for years and years and years, we've been doing the same thing in these institutions and the negotiating is not getting anywhere, just like Congress, it's the same idea, you guys. These huge institutions that are supposed to actually produce progress don't produce anything. Nothing ever happens. And the reason why Trump is a shock to the system is because he doesn't accept that. That's not his status quo. That's not going to work for him. He wants things to get done. He's a businessman. He wants things to get done. He wants to sign deals. He wants to get going. He wants to move forward. The other thing that I think people misunderstand about Trump is that he does not like killing. He does not want people to die at all, okay? He lost his brother at a young age to alcoholism, and it deeply affected him. Okay, if you do any deep dive on Trump and take the blinders off for what you believe about him, you know, he's a human under there, you guys. He has reasons. He has motivations. He has personal experiences that have impacted his life. And a lot of them play into how he looks at these things. And I can tell you, the reason why he uses economic leverage this way is because there is not a bone in his body that wants to use military leverage. There is not a bone in his body that wants to go out of his way to cause physical harm to any other country. And if the economics is the lever that he can use that doesn't cause killing and death and actually get something done, then that's the lever he knows best how to use. So I think that what's important to realize is that since 2008, the EU's GDP was, well, in 2008, the EU's GDP was 110% of the US, okay? So 08, they were doing better than us. I remember 08 wasn't great. But in 2023, it was down to 67%, okay? So what that says is that we're trending in opposite directions. And it might behoove us to start developing trade relationships with other countries, like I said, that are closer to us in proximity, and also that have emerging markets that aren't hamstrung by these deals that the UK has signed on to. A lot of the classic, like for instance, the UN, okay? We have all of these sustainable goals that we're supposed to hit by 2030, okay? A lot of them are climate change related. A lot of them are gender ideology related and equity related. And the reality of the situation is that these institutions no longer represent the goals and aims of America. And again, all of this traditionalist mindset about all of these institutions that we've been involved in forever, it's just nostalgic. It doesn't actually represent who we are, where we want to go. And the reality is that those institutions have been run by globalists that want all of the things we don't anymore. all of the things that we have realized this doesn't work for us. This isn't improving our life. Things are getting worse, not better. And we've got to be able to reverse course. We have to be able to say, you know what, this isn't what we thought it was. Our intentions were good. We set out with great intentions. But what you have to do is you have to realize what an outcome is. You have to realize how you aimed and you missed. And then you got to be able to re-aim and find a different target. I think that some of the things that we need to look at are who are the emerging global trade partners that we might be able to work with, whose GDP is growing. Okay. The reality of the situation is we've got a lot of GDP growing in African countries, in countries that are starting to stabilize and get, regularly run government, the ones that at least have oil and natural resources. They're starting to get going. I mean, I think that is a beautiful thing also, because it means that those countries need less aid. Okay, we don't have to be spending our money. And that's the other thing that came up in the national security strategy is that, listen, while there could be plenty of viable options where America can intervene and intercede and try and help, we gotta scale them back, because to prioritize everything is to prioritize nothing. I think that's almost a direct quote. And the reality is that we can't be so focused on all of these people and places that don't have a long-term interest in pairing with us and creating trade relationships that are going to have equal benefits. India has a huge growing economy. Their GDP growth rate is projected to be 6.2 in 2026, which I think is the reason why a lot of people are trying to reshuffle. I mean, honestly, India is a growing country that makes trade decisions in the moment as to what's going to benefit them at the moment. There's not a lot of long-term loyalty that rests in that trade relationship. And that's, again, a cultural thing that we have to be willing to accept. Okay. Not everybody operates the way we operate, and that's okay. Saying that this culture is different than ours is not racist, because nobody's saying ours is better. Their culture works for them. That's fine, but it's not ours. And we have to be able to meet them where they're at. We have to be able to admit that and then negotiate with them knowing that. That's important. Okay. They're very transactional. This moment is not going to determine what they're going to do next moment. The other one is the Philippines, 5.7% growth expected in 2026. And where they're gaining more integrated supply chains, they're getting more involved in a lot of the trade that's happening. Again, Vietnam, another one, 5.6%, Indonesia, 4.9%. And then Saudi Arabia is diversifying, and they're expecting 4.4% GDP growth in 2026. And by these countries in Asia, Pacific, and Africa are expected to contribute about 65% of the global economic growth by 2035, which is going to completely reshape our international trade dynamics. So when you look at that, when you look at those things, can you understand why Trump is trying to shift out of these relationships with the European Union? They're not helping us. They're not a beneficial trade partner. They don't have good trade projections. At some point, you have to understand that it's not beneficial to lash onto a sinking ship. Not to mention that ship's demographics are changing mighty quickly, and it doesn't really represent the same country we initially had those allegiances with. And so if they're going to continue to walk away from some of the freedoms and the rights that we believe in and some of the standards that we set for, I don't know, what we expect, how we live. I mean, the National Health Service in the UK just put out information to health professionals that's starting to push that first cousin marriage is okay, that it doesn't cause as many genetic issues as it was said to have. You guys, I'm sorry, but that doesn't match with my priorities. That's not healthy. That creates a lot of long-term health conditions in children and then humans that end up on their National Health Service. They're going to be a sinking ship in 10 years. They're already not in a good place, but they're not going to be able to sustain what they've got going on. And I appreciate a leader who looks further than 4 years down the line. Okay, I appreciate a leader who looks out over the next 20 years, looking back at the last 20 and says, who's up and coming? Who should we partner with now? And I understand that not everybody agrees with the idea of running a country like a business. But the reality of the situation is that it's got a money in and it's got a money out. And that we're in a pretty big pile of debt right now. And a lot of these countries are willing to, like we saw, dump bonds to try and shake us. Okay, sure. Because you got tariffs? Because we want to talk about NATO on Greenland? I don't think that doesn't really seem like an allied relationship to me. Only after threat did they have a whole bunch of NATO soldiers show up on Greenland. And good. Glad they're there. That was kind of the point. That was kind of the point. It's like, we'd like to see Greenland a little more protected, guys. We'd like to see you prioritize the Arctic. And it seems to me like that's pretty much what we've gotten out of the situation. I understand the chaos of the whole situation, but if that's the only way things are getting done, can you blame him? Again, he's not the kind of president that's not going to let things get done. I think that our economy is the leverage, guys. No trading partner can cut off 25% of their customer base, if not more, because it depends on the product and the market as to what we're importing. It could be a huge, much greater portion of that. But again, we're 25% of the global economy in one country. Everybody needs access to that. Everybody needs access to the American dollar. Everybody needs access to our markets. And it's a beautiful thing to use. Why shouldn't we leverage that? And again, I'll repeat myself. I would much rather be using economic leverage than using military might. And I'm glad that he didn't. And I'm glad that it wasn't a real threat. I feel like people overreact a lot, man. I guess my summary here is that presidents of all time have used economic leverage, and all of a sudden, because it's President Trump, people have got problems with it. So I get it. I get that he doesn't always speak the kindest and that he can come off as a bully, but regular diplomacy hasn't really gotten us there very far in a very long time. And the EU are making laws that go against our rights that they're trying to get to apply to us. They have free speech laws that they're putting in, the DMA that they're trying to get to apply to our social media platforms to get certain things censored. I mean, the Germany is all proud that they've got, 3,000 people arrested from memes, and they want those laws to apply to us. No, thank you. But these are supposed to be our allies. Again, I don't think that there's anything wrong with reassessing relationships and deciding whether these allies really are operating in ways that we agree with. And if they aren't operating in ways that we agree with, then I agree with being able to change our relationships. I'm not saying we won't be allies. I'm not even saying pull out of NATO. I'm just saying it's okay to use some economic leverage to get some movement out of people that are stuck in the mud, especially when you're the big dog on the court. We enjoy so much global peace and money to consume. We can complain all we want about our economy right now, you guys, but in the grand scheme of things, we've got it made, okay? Don't forget how lucky you are to be an American. Do not forget how lucky and blessed you are to live in the richest, most powerful country in the world. You don't have to be sorry for that. We're not an oppressor. We've sent billions and billions of dollars across the world to help others. And now for this one moment, we're trying to prioritize and help ourselves. Obviously, every country has made mistakes, okay? Nobody's perfect. But the reality of the situation is we do hold a moral high ground on some level. We do go out of our way to help and send money to places that need it. Pretty sure we just liberated Venezuela. Haven't met too many Venezuelans that are having a problem with that, but somehow we have Americans protesting that in the streets. Come on. I'm tired of the feeling sorry for being an American thing. I'm really over that. You know how many lives, you know how many American lives have been lost fighting for the power we hold, fighting for the privileges we have? That's not being oppressed. That's earning it. That's fighting for it. That's standing up for it. And I don't care what you think about it, you still are benefiting from it. You still have the right to speak against it without consequence. And that is a massive blessing. Okay? And when we have weak presidents, we get taken advantage of. And just because we went from a weak president to a strong one, again, pretty sure we're getting things done. Pretty sure China's not taking advantage of us anymore. Pretty sure China's out of South America. Pretty sure that we've got the Panama Canal back. Pretty sure that Greenland's going to pull the trade deal they have with China. It's all important. It all matters. It all wraps back around into our security. The other thing is, guys, you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. You're being told what they want you to know. And then the media is spinning the stories anyway. So to think that you have some full sail knowledge of all the inner workings, no. And you also aren't entitled to it. Okay? It's not your job to do. We've elected people to do that job, and I'm pretty sure they'll keep us in the loop when important things happen. But for the most part, like, government isn't necessarily supposed to be 100% transparent. We've never expected that. We elect these leaders to represent us and expect that they're going to act accordingly. And I know that they don't always do that. But on some level, you have to trust the institutions. We are where we are, okay? Some of these institutions have proven to be faulty, and some we're still putting our trust in because we have to. Okay? So you got to just go along. No, I'm not saying go along against rights or anything like that, but what I'm saying is, like, take a step back and witness the fact that Trump may be crude and he may say things you don't like and he may be kind of a bully, but so is Xi and so is Putin. And if we want to be a force that is protected and safe, then we need somebody that's big enough to stand up to those guys. And we need somebody that's not going to be taken advantage of by them. And it's not a realistic mindset of what's happening in the world to think that they're not a real threat, or that some delicate diplomatic policy is going to strong arm these guys. It's not. They were running drugs to try and kill us. China was selling precursors to Mexico for fentanyl. They were trying to kill us. They were happy as shit to just let hundreds of thousands of Americans OD. And Canada didn't want to shut the border down to stop it. But now we got to yield to what Carney's telling us. They didn't want to protect us. He can boo-hoo all he wants. Go ahead, sleep with China. Go ahead, Carney, make that choice. EV, Chinese EVs all day, buddy. Sure. I think it would be prudent for our allies to follow suit. I think it would be prudent for them to realize that maybe they've walked down the wrong path. And the reality of the situation is, I haven't heard very much about climate change recently. I'm pretty sure that whole storyline got dropped. And now Europe's energy sector is trashed. Their economy is trashed. And they've got to find a way back. They've got to find a way back. We're offering them oil. They could trade with us. They could. Or more than they are. But again, these are all the choices they have to make. And if they want to partner with Russia and China instead of us, that we haven't pushed them to that. We asked them to play fair. And they're making their own choices, like any country would, okay? Like any country would. So we're not pushing our allies into the arms of China. We're just they're making their own choice. We're giving them the options. They're making their own choice, okay? None of these things were promised. Not even our trade deals are promised. Nothing is promised. I'm sorry. I trust Donald Trump. I trust what he's doing. I know he's a Looney Tune sometimes and he goes for the top parameter of negotiations and it blows people's minds, but it's working in my opinion. And I like I like a president that's going to stand up to these other countries. I need that in my life, man. And it's not delicate and it's not traditionally diplomatic. And again, I think it is right for the moment. And I think that he's right for the moment. And I enjoy the fact that we are using economic leverage and we are using what the American people worked for, our productivity, as our weapon. See you later, guys.